5:30 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026, the Strait of Hormuz was a narrow corridor of black water and heavy, humid air that smelled of salt spray and unrefined diesel. At coordinates 26 degrees 45 minutes north, 55 degrees 45 minutes east, the amphibious transport dock USS San Antonio, designation LPD-17, steamed steadily at a speed of 15 knots. The pre-dawn light was gray and flat, barely masking the jagged, volcanic coastline of Qeshm Island, where the forted Iranian coastal defense batteries waited in reinforced concrete bunkers. Inside the well deck of the USS San Antonio, the heavy steel stern gate was submerged as two landing craft utility prepared to depart for a scheduled training exercise. The air in the, deck was thick with the roar of heavy marine engines and the sharp, chemical scent of grease and hydraulic fluid. Suddenly, the electronic warfare suites on the nearby destroyer, USS Mason, designation DDG-87, detected high-energy radar spikes originating from the hidden Iranian positions along the shore. The quiet morning was shattered as the first battery of 155mm coastal artillery pieces opened fire without any prior radio warning or provocation. The muzzle flashes lit up the dark shoreline, like a sequence of jagged summer lightning, sending supersonic steel projectiles screaming across the 3 miles of open water. The first shell impacted the lead landing craft utility 1665, exactly 400 yards from the mothership, punching through the light aluminum decking with catastrophic force. The high explosive round detonated inside the troop compartment, sending a pillar of white water and orange flame 40 feet into the humid morning air. A second and third round followed within 3 seconds, shredding the engine, compartment of the craft, and igniting the 50-gallon drums of spare fuel stored on the upper deck. The landing craft rolled violently to its port side as thousands of gallons of seawater flooded through the ruptured hull plating near the waterline. The weight of the equipment and the massive marine engines pulled the bow beneath the churning surface of the strait in less than 90 seconds. On the bridge of the USS San Antonio, the commanding officer watched through high-powered optics as the second vessel, landing craft utility 1666, attempted a desperate evasive turn. The craft surged forward, its engines screaming at full power, but the Iranian gunners had already calculated the lead and adjusted their heavy artillery fire. A bracket of 4 shells bracketed the second craft, the concussive force of the near misses lifting the entire 50-ton vessel partially out of the water. The final round of the volley struck the bridge house of the landing craft, obliterating the navigation equipment and killing the 3-man crew instantly. The vessel lost steering and began to circle aimlessly, thick black smoke boiling out of the shattered pilot house and drifting toward the Iranian coast. 5 seconds later, a secondary explosion from the internal fuel tanks tore the hull apart, sending jagged pieces of hot metal flying in all directions across the surface. The remains of the second landing craft vanished beneath the waves as the sound of the explosions finally reached the ears of the sailors on the deck of the sailors. USS Mason. The destroyer USS Mason immediately began a hard turn to port, its 4 gas turbine engines roaring as it increased speed to 30 knots to mask the transport dock. The ship's ANSPY-6 radar system moved into a high-intensity tracking mode, identifying the exact GPS coordinates of the Iranian batteries by tracing the ballistic arcs of the incoming shells. On the deck of the USS San Antonio, the general quarters alarm began to wail, a rhythmic and piercing sound that signaled the transition from a routine transit to a high-intensity combat engagement. The sailors and Marines on board moved with professional speed, securing the well-deck doors and preparing the medical bays for the inevitable arrival of casualties from the water. The cold Gulf air, previously silent, was now filled with the overlapping sounds of secondary explosions and the frantic radio calls of the surviving search and rescue teams. The primary sensor arrays of the carrier strike group confirmed the total loss of 2 vessels and 42 personnel missing or in the water as the first wave of Iranian fire ceased. This unprovoked strike had effectively closed the primary shipping lane and forced the United States Navy into an immediate and violent defensive posture. The commander of the amphibious group ordered an immediate turn to 300 degrees to put the armored hull of the transport between the shore batteries and the surviving sailors. The battle for the Strait of Hormuz had begun with a devastating blow to the American battle flotilla, leaving the surface of the water littered with burning debris and oil. 5:32 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. 2 minutes after the initial Iranian salvo, the United States Navy transitioned from a state of shock to a disciplined and lethal counterstrike. At coordinates 26 degrees 46 minutes north, 55 degrees 47 minutes east, the destroyer, USS Mason, designation DDG-87, leaned hard into a starboard turn. The ship's hull vibrated with the immense power of 4 gas turbine engines pushing the vessel toward the threat. In the Combat Information Center, the air was cool and filled with the low hum of high-performance servers and the quiet, urgent murmurs of fire control technicians. The ANSPY-6 radar system had already computed the point of origin for the Iranian shells, identifying 3 distinct fortified bunkers on the ridgeline of Qeshm Island. The commanding officer of the USS Mason gave the order for immediate counter-battery fire to suppress the enemy positions and protect the retreating amphibious transport dock. On the forward deck of the destroyer, the Mark 45 Mod 4 5-inch gun turret swiveled with robotic precision, its long barrel elevating to 22 degrees. The automated loading system beneath the deck hissed as it slotted a 70-pound high-explosive, electronically fused projectile into the chamber. A split second later, the first round was fired with a bone-shaking crack that echoed across the surface of the strait, followed by a brilliant orange muzzle flash that briefly illuminated the gray-green sea. The smell of burnt cordite and hot metal immediately began to drift across the bridge wing, a sharp and acidic scent that signaled the start of the American response. Joining the engagement from 5 miles to the south was the cruiser USS Philippine Sea, designation CG-58. The larger vessel, equipped with 2 5-inch gun mounts, began a simultaneous bombardment of the northernmost Iranian battery. The 16,000-ton cruiser maintained a steady course, providing a stable platform for its gunners to walk their fire across the enemy's reinforced concrete emplacements. Each time the forward and aft guns fired in tandem, the massive steel deck of the cruiser shuddered, sending a physical shockwave through the boots of every sailor on board. The sound was not a single bang, but a deep, rhythmic thudding that felt like a heavy hammer striking the very air itself. The shells from the 2 American warships traveled at over 2,500 feet per second, crossing the distance to the shoreline in less than 10 seconds. The first 4 rounds from the USS Mason impacted the hillsides surrounding the Iranian bunkers, throwing up massive plumes of brown earth and shattered volcanic rock. The fire control technicians used the radar data to adjust the fall of shot by 50 meters, bringing the next volley directly onto the roof of the center bunker. The high-explosive shells, fused for point detonation, struck the concrete with thousands of pounds of kinetic energy before erupting in a series of white-hot flashes. Jagged shards of reinforced concrete and twisted rebar were sent flying into the air as the American gunners systematically dismantled the enemy position. The Iranian gunners attempted to return fire, but the precision of the Aegis combat system made their task nearly impossible. Every time a coastal artillery piece fired, the USS Mason sensors tracked the muzzle flash and the shell's trajectory, allowing the American destroyer to shift its aim within 3 seconds. The air over the Strait of Hormuz was now crisscrossed by the invisible arcs of heavy projectiles, the atmosphere screaming with the friction of steel cutting through the passion. Humid morning haze. On the bridge of the USS Philippine Sea, the tactical action officer monitored the status of the amphibious group, ensuring that the heavy cruiser stayed positioned as a shield between the shore and the survivors in the water. To the north, the smoke from the initial Iranian strike began to mix with the thick, black plumes rising from the neutralized bunkers. The gray light of dawn was now fully established, revealing a horizon torn apart by the white streaks of naval gunfire and the dark smudges of burning shore installations. The United States Navy had successfully established local fire superiority, forcing the Iranian batteries into a defensive posture as they struggled to survive the incoming weight of metal. The precision and speed of the escort response had prevented a second coordinated volley from hitting the USS San Antonio, buying GNG precious time for the fleet's defensive screens to fully activate. As the engagement reached its 10th minute, the USS Mason transitioned from single shots to rapid-fire bursts, pouring 20 rounds per minute into the primary Iranian command node. The deck of the destroyer remained a hive of controlled activity, with no signs of panic or hesitation among the crew. They moved with the calm, mechanical efficiency of a force that had rehearsed this exact scenario 1,000 times in simulators. The immediate objective was clear: keep the Iranian heads down, destroy their optics, and ensure that no more American blood was spilled while the larger carrier strike group prepared its overwhelming aerial response. The water of the strait, once calm and dark, was now churned into a white froth by the wakes of the maneuvering warships and the splashes of near misses. The silence of the morning was a distant memory, replaced by the relentless, percussive symphony of modern naval warfare. The first phase of the counterstrike was complete, having successfully suppressed the immediate threat. But the sensors of the 7th Fleet indicated that more Iranian assets were beginning to mobilize further inland. The escort ships maintained their vigil, guns hot and radars searching, as the first jets from the USS Abraham Lincoln roared into the sky to take over the fight. 6 in the morning, on the 10th of March, 2026, 500 miles to the north of the Strait of Hormuz, in a hardened underground facility at Al Udeid Air Base. The atmosphere was one of calculated, high-intensity focus. This was the headquarters of United States Central Command, the nerve center for all American military operations in the region. Inside the Combined Air Operations Center, hundreds of flat-screen monitors glowed with blue and red icons, representing every ship, aircraft, and ground unit in the Middle Eastern theater. The air was chilled to 68 degrees to protect the massive server banks, and it carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone and floor wax. The commander of Central Command stood at the center of the room, flanked by his senior staff and liaison officers from the Commander Game of United States Navy and Marine Corps. Within minutes of the first shells impacting the landing craft, a secure video teleconference had been established with the Pentagon and the National Security Council in Washington, D.C. The decision was immediate. The unprovoked attack on United States sovereign assets required a proportional and decisive response to ensure the continued flow of global commerce through the strait. The operation was officially designated Trident Reach, a multi-domain campaign designed to systematically dismantle the Iranian coastal defense network. 200 miles to the dotted south, in the Gulf of Oman, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, designation CVN-72, began to turn into the wind. The 100,000-ton vessel moved with surprising grace, its 4 massive propellers churning the dark water into a wide, white wake. On the 4.5-acre flight deck, the yellow-shirted aircraft handlers moved with practice speed, directing the first wave of strike aircraft toward the 4 steam-powered catapults. The air on the deck was a chaotic roar of jet engines and the high-pitched scream of auxiliary power units, smelling strongly of JP-5 aviation fuel and sea salt. High above the carrier, an E-2 Charlie Hawkeye airborne early warning aircraft circled at an altitude of 30,000 feet. Its massive rotating radar dome scanned the horizon for hundreds of miles in every direction, providing a god's eye view of the entire battlespace to the commanders below. The crew of the Hawkeye, tucked into a cramped and windowless cabin filled with glowing green displays, began the complex task of deconflicting the dozens of American aircraft now converging on the Strait of Hormuz. They were the conductors of this lethal orchestra, ensuring that every strike package had a clear path to its target. At 6:15 in the morning, the first FA-18 Super Hornet was hooked into the catapult shuttle. The pilot increased the twin engines to full afterburner, the blue-white flames licking the deck as the jet strained against the hold-back bar. With a sudden, violent release of steam, the 30-ton aircraft was accelerated from 0 to 150 miles per hour in less than 3 seconds. The tenth pilot was crushed into his seat by 5 Gs of force as the jet shot off the bow and climbed steeply into the humid morning sky. This was followed in 30-second intervals by 3 more fighters, then an EA-18 Golf Growler electronic warfare jet, and finally a pair of F-35 Bravo stealth fighters that had launched from a nearby amphibious assault ship. The strategic objective of Operation Trident Reach was not just to silence the guns that had fired on the landing craft, but to blind and deafen the entire Iranian military apparatus along the southern coast. This required a synchronized effort between the surface fleet, the carrier air wing, and the space-based assets of the United States Space Force. High-resolution satellites were already repositioning over Qeshm Island, feeding real-time imagery of mobile missile launchers and radar sites directly to the cockpits of the inbound jets. The command and control structure was functioning with perfect efficiency. Orders flowed from Central Command to the Carrier Strike Group commander, and then down to the individual pilots and sailors on the front line. Though there was no hesitation, only the steady, professional execution of a pre-planned contingency. The United States was shifting from a defensive posture to an offensive campaign of unprecedented scale in the region. As the sun began to rise higher over the Gulf of Oman, the first wave of Operation Trident Reach crossed the coastline. The sound of their engines, a low, rolling thunder that signaled the coming storm. 6:20 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. High above the Strait of Hormuz, at an altitude of 30,000 feet, the environment was a study in cold, sterile isolation. The air outside the pressurized cockpits was thin and frigid, reaching temperatures of 50 degrees below zero, while the interior of the aircraft hummed with the steady, rhythmic vibration of high-performance electronics. Inside the cockpit of an EA-18 Golf Growler, the only sound was the low hiss of the pilot's oxygen regulator and the occasional crisp click of a toggle switch. The early morning sun, still low on the horizon, cast a brilliant, blinding glare across the cockpit glass, reflecting off the complex array of digital displays that flickered with emerald and amber data. The mission of the 2 EA-18 Golf Growlers, flying in a tight formation, 20 miles off the Iranian coast, was the total electronic decapitation of the enemy's defensive grid. Each aircraft carried 5 ANALQ-99 tactical jamming pods attached to its wings and centerline. These pods were not kinetic weapons, but sophisticated emitters of high-powered electromagnetic energy, designed to overwhelm any receiver within a 200-kilometer radius. As the aircraft reached their designated station at coordinates 26 degrees 55 minutes north, 55 degrees 55 minutes east, the electronic warfare officer in the rear seat initiated the suppression sequence. With a single command, the Growlers began to paint the Iranian coastline with a massive wall of white noise. The ANALQ-99 pods emitted concentrated beams of energy across multiple frequency bands, focusing on the specific wavelengths used by the Iranian HQ-9 surface-to-air missile systems. On the ground, the Iranian radar operators at the Bandar Abbas Air Defense Center saw their clear, green tactical displays suddenly erupt into a chaotic mess of flickering white lines and geometric static. Their long-range acquisition radars, which had been tracking the American Carrier Strike Group, were now completely blinded by the invisible electronic blizzard. The air inside the Growler's cockpit carried the faint, metallic scent of ozone and the sterile smell of recycled air as the mission computers worked at maximum capacity. The electronic warfare officer monitored the enemy's attempts to frequency hop A. Defensive tactic, where a radar rapidly changes its operating frequency to avoid jamming. However, the advanced algorithms of the United States Navy aircraft anticipated these shifts in less than 10 milliseconds, instantly slaving the jamming pods to the new frequencies. The Iranian communication networks, including the high-frequency radios used to coordinate the coastal artillery batteries, were severed into a series of unintelligible clicks and rhythmic hisses. This electronic blanket created a 300 square kilometer dead zone where the Iranian military could neither see nor communicate with its own forces. To an observer, on the ground, the sky appeared empty and silent, but the electromagnetic spectrum was a battlefield of unprecedented violence. The Growlers worked in perfect synchronization with an E-2 Charlie Hawkeye orbiting further to the south, which acted as a relay to share the jamming map with the rest of the strike group. This ensured that American pilots could move toward their targets without the risk of being targeted by radar-guided missiles. The physical sensation inside the Growler was one of deceptive calm. Despite the fact that the aircraft were projecting enough energy to light up a small city, the pilot maintained a steady racetrack pattern, keeping the aircraft within the optimal geometry to shield the incoming strike fighters. Below the clouds, the dark blue water of the strait was dotted with the white wakes of fast-moving vessels, but for the Iranian coastal defenders, those ships had effectively vanished from their screens. The invisible wall of the electronic blanket was now fully established, providing a safe corridor for the kinetic phase of Operation Trident Reach to begin. As the engagement entered its second hour, the EA-18 Gulf Growlers confirmed that every known Iranian early warning radar from Qeshm Island to the Strait of Hormuz was either malfunctioning or completely offline. The primary Iranian command node at Bandar Abbas was forced to rely on visual observation and outdated landline telephones, which were far too slow to react to modern aerial warfare. The professional execution of the electronic warfare mission had stripped the enemy of their most potent defensive advantage. With the Iranian eyes and ears neutralized, the commander of the 7th Fleet gave the order for the first wave of strike aircraft to cross the fence and engage the targets on the ground. 6:45 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. The humid haze over the Strait of Hormuz was suddenly sliced open by the high-pitched scream of twin 44 turbofan engines. At coordinates 26 degrees 58 minutes north, 55 degrees 48 minutes east, a flight of 4 F-35 Bravo Lightning II stealth fighters descended from 30,000 feet to their strike altitude. The cockpits of the 5th-generation jets were silent, save for the rhythmic pulse of the life support systems and the low, synthetic tone of the tactical data link. The pilots, encased in carbon fiber helmets with integrated heads-up displays, saw the world not through the glass, but through a projected 360-degree digital reconstruction of the battlefield. The mission was simple: eliminate the primary Iranian coastal artillery battery that had sunk the landing craft. The target was a reinforced concrete bunker complex carved into the limestone cliffs of Qeshm Island, designated Battery Alpha. The air around the island was thick with the smell of stagnant saltwater and the acrid, lingering smoke from the earlier naval exchange. As the lead F-35 Bravo reached the release point, the internal weapons bay doors cycled open with a mechanical hum that lasted less than 2 seconds. The trigger was squeezed. A 1,000-pound GBU-32 Joint Direct Attack munition dropped from the internal rack, its GPS-guided fins snapping into position as it began a terminal plummet toward the coordinates. The pilot watched on his secondary display as the weapon streaked toward the Earth at 900 feet per second. The heat from the friction of the air began to cook the casing of the bomb as it reached its final velocity. The warhead punched straight through the 3-meter-thick reinforced concrete roof of the primary magazine, the kinetic energy alone shattering the upper structural supports before the fuse initiated the main charge. A massive fireball erupted instantly, bleached white at the core where the temperature reached 3,000 degrees. The internal explosion of the stored Iranian ammunition acted as a secondary detonator, lifting the entire southern face of the cliff 5 meters into the air before it disintegrated. Shards of limestone, the size of pickup trucks, were sent flying 300 yards into the sea, the impact creating a series of white geysers that marched across the surface of the water. The Iranian defenders reacted with desperate, uncoordinated fury. A twin-barrel 23mm anti-aircraft gun, hidden beneath a camouflage net 200 meters from the blast, began to hammer away at the sky. The tracer rounds, bright green and staccato, stitched a frantic pattern across the gray morning light. The gunner kicked the traversal pedal hard to the right, trying to find the source of the invisible strike, but his rounds found only empty air. One of the F-35 Bravos, sensing the thermal signature of the anti-aircraft gun, banked hard to the left and stabilized its nose. The pilot engaged the 20mm internal cannon, a 4-barrel rotary gun capable of firing 3,300 rounds per minute. The sound of the American cannon was a single, continuous growl, like the tearing of a giant silk sheet. The high-explosive incendiary rounds walked across the Iranian position in a straight line, shredding the camouflage netting and the men beneath it in less than 1 second. The anti-aircraft gun erupted into a fountain of sparks and hot oil. The barrels twisted into useless scrap metal as the gunner was thrown backward by the concussive force. Black smoke boiled out of the shattered gun tub, mixing with the dust of the collapsing cliffside. The immediate aftermath was a scene of absolute devastation. Where the primary battery had stood 3 minutes prior, there was now only a jagged, smoking crater filled with twisted rebar and burning propellant. The sound of the explosions echoed off the surrounding hills for 10 full seconds before falling into a heavy, dead silence. The F-35 Bravos, their internal bays closed and their stealth profiles restored, climbed back into the cloud layer, leaving behind a shoreline that was no longer a threat. The first kinetic counterstrike of Operation Trident Reach had successfully erased the primary Iranian defensive position with surgical, terrifying precision. 7:15 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. The surface of the Strait of Hormuz at coordinates 26 degrees 45 minutes north, 55 degrees 46 minutes east, was a chaotic graveyard of floating wreckage and slick, iridescent patches of spilled diesel fuel. The heavy, humid air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt plastic and the metallic tang of blood. Amidst the bobbing debris of the 2 sunken landing craft, small groups of American sailors and Marines clung to orange life rafts and jagged pieces of aluminum decking, their faces stained black by oil and soot. The water, churned by the earlier artillery impacts, was now deathly still, except for the rhythmic lap of small waves against the remains of the hulls. The silence was broken by the low-frequency thrum of twin T-700 engines. 2 MH-60 Sierra helicopters, call signs Rescue 1 and Rescue 2, descended from the morning haze, their rotor wash whipping the oily surface of the water into a white spray. The lead helicopter hovered at 50 feet. Its side door slid open to reveal a combat search and rescue technician, clad in a green flight suit and a heavy tactical vest. The technician gripped the rescue hoist, his eyes scanning the debris field for movement through a pair of high-powered binoculars. The heat from the helicopter's exhaust washed over the survivors below, providing a brief, surreal warmth against the chilling shock of the seawater. "I have 3 survivors at 10 o'clock, 50 yards, the crew chief shouted over the internal intercom. The pilot adjusted the collective, the 10-ton aircraft shifting with robotic smoothness, as the rescue swimmer stepped into the open air and began his descent on the steel cable. As the swimmer hit the water, he was immediately enveloped by the suffocating smell of unrefined fuel. He swam toward a young corporal who was struggling to keep his head above the swell, his life vest shredded by shrapnel. The swimmer secured the corporal into the rescue strop, signaling the winch operator with a sharp thumbs up. Within 20 seconds, the wounded Marine was being pulled upward into the safety of the cabin, where a Navy corpsman waited with trauma kits and emergency oxygen. The rescue operation was not uncontested. From a hidden cave entrance on the jagged cliffs of Qeshm Island, a shoulder-fired surface-to-air missile was launched toward Rescue 2. The missile, a heat-seeking MiSAG-2, shrieked into the air, leaving a thin trail of white smoke. The helicopter's missile approach warning system immediately screamed a piercing digital alert in the pilot's headset. "Vampire! Vampire! Flare! Flare! Flare!" the co-pilot yelled, punching the countermeasures release button. A sequence of magnesium flares ejected from the sides of the helicopter, burning at 2,000 degrees as they tumbled toward the water. The missile, confused by the intense thermal decoy, veered sharply to the right and detonated harmlessly 200 yards away, the blast wave vibrating the air but causing no damage to the airframe. Rescue 1's door gunner, manned at a GAU-21 50 caliber machine gun, immediately identified the launch point. The weapon erupted with a rhythmic, earth-shaking thudding that sounded like a heavy hammer striking an anvil. The massive rounds, each 5 inches long, tore through the mouth of the cave, punching through limestone and rock with over 10,000 foot-pounds of energy. Dust and debris exploded outward from the cliffside as the gunner walked his fire across the entrance, effectively burying the missile team under tons of collapsed stone. The smell of hot lead and hydraulic fluid filled the cabin of the helicopter as the gunner maintained his vigil, scanning the ridgeline for any further movement. Despite the localized fire, the search and rescue teams refused to break station. For 45 minutes, the two helicopters worked in a high-stakes dance of hovering and winching, pulling 12 survivors from the water. The medical bay on the USS San Antonio was already receiving the first wave of casualties, the deck slick with seawater and antiseptic. Each time a helicopter landed on the flight deck, the rotors created a miniature hurricane of spray and wind, the ground crew moving with frantic but disciplined speed to offload the stretchers. The pilots' hands were steady on the controls, though their flight suits were soaked with sweat from the intense concentration required to hover under fire. The operation was a testament to the leave no man behind ethos of the United States military. While the strike jets continued to pound targets further inland, the search and rescue crews remained in the heart of the danger zone, their only protection the thin skin of their aircraft and the suppressing fire of their door guns. By 8 in the morning, the primary debris field had been cleared of all visible survivors. The helicopters banked away from the coast, their cabins filled with the low groans of the wounded and the steady beep of medical monitors. The cost of the morning was becoming clearer with every minute, but the immediate survival of the 12 rescued men was a hard-won victory in the middle of a shifting and violent battlefield. 8:30 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. 30 miles south of the primary engagement zone, at coordinates 26 degrees 15 minutes north, 56 degrees 10 minutes east. The sea was a deep, restless cobalt. The air was thick with heat and the heavy, industrial scent of thousands of tons of high-grade marine fuel. This was the mobile lifeblood of Operation Trident Reach. The fleet replenishment oiler, USNS Arctic designation TAOE-8, held a steady course at 12 knots, its massive hull displacing nearly 50,000 tons of water. To its port side, the destroyer USS Mason maintained a parallel station, separated by only 180 feet of churning, white-capped water. Logistics in the middle of a combat zone was a high-wire act of precision engineering and raw physical strength. Between the two ships, 4 heavy-gauge steel tension wires were stretched taut, vibrating with the immense strain of the two vessels moving in tandem through a 4-meter swell. From these wires, massive black fuel hoses, 7 inches in diameter, were suspended on trolley blocks. The hoses pulsed with the pressure of 3,000 gallons of DFM marine diesel being pumped every minute. On the deck of the USS Mason, the replenishment crew wore bright yellow, blue, and green jerseys, their faces glistening with sweat and salt spray, as they fought to secure the heavy couplings against the roll of the ship. The deck of the USNS Arctic was a forest of king posts and massive cranes, its well-organized chaos essential to keeping the strike group in the fight. While the fuel lines pumped thousands of gallons of energy into the destroyer's belly, a separate vertical replenishment was underway. An MH-60 Sierra helicopter, lifting off from the Arctic's flight deck, carried a 2,000-pound pallet of Mark 82 500-pound bombs suspended by a heavy nylon cargo sling. The helicopter banked sharply toward the USS Philippine Sea, the downwash from its rotors creating a blinding mist of seawater that tasted of brine and jet exhaust. Inside the hangar of the USS Mason, the logistics officer coordinated the arrival of critical repair parts and medical supplies. The air in the hangar was cooler than the flight deck, smelling of hydraulic fluid and the sterile plastic of emergency blood bags. Every minute the ships remained tethered was a minute of extreme vulnerability. The Iranian coastal missile batteries, though suppressed by the initial airstrikes, remained a constant threat. On both ships scanned the horizon with intense focus, their fingers hovering over the launch buttons of the rolling airframe missile systems. To the north, the sky was still streaked with the white contrails of the strike fighters, but here, the battle was one of endurance and supply. A single miscalculation in steering or a snapped tension wire could result in a catastrophic collision or a massive fuel fire that would cripple the escort screen. The bridge teams on both vessels spoke in low, measured tones, their eyes locked on the distance markers bobbing in the water between the hulls. "Station keeping is steady," the helmsman of the Mason reported, his knuckles white on the wheel as he compensated for a sudden surge in the current. By 9:15 in the morning, the USS Mason had received 60,000 gallons of fuel and 40 pallets of ammunition, including 10 tons of 5-inch projectiles for its primary gun. The replenishment hoses were disconnected with a spray of residual fuel that was quickly washed away by the deck crews. The tension wires were retracted, and the destroyer increased speed to 25 knots, its bow slicing through the water as it returned to its station in the screen. The USNS Arctic immediately began preparations to receive the next vessel in the strike group, its crew working with a relentless, mechanical rhythm that showed no signs of fatigue. The logistics of Operation Trident Reach were the invisible foundation of the American response. Without the steady flow of fuel, munitions, and medical supplies from the combat logistics force, the carrier strike group would be a collection of drifting steel islands within 48 hours. The successful execution of the underway replenishment in the middle of a contested strait was a display of professional seamanship that matched the lethality of the pilots in the sky. As the USNS Arctic moved toward its next coordinates, the fleet remained fully fueled and fully armed, ready for the next phase of the campaign. 9:45 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. The humidity in the Strait of Hormuz had climbed to 85%, creating a thick, shimmering haze that smelled of stagnant salt water and the sulfurous stench of burning coastal bunkers. At coordinates 26 degrees 55 minutes north, 56 degrees 5 minutes east, the destroyer USS Mason and the cruiser USS Philippine Sea held their station, their gray hulls ghost-like against the sun-bleached horizon. The tactical situation had reached a critical inflection point. Satellite, intelligence, and E-2 Charlie Hawkeye surveillance confirmed that the Iranian military was preparing a second, more massive volley from a series of deeply buried, mobile anti-ship missile launchers hidden within the limestone interior of Qeshm Island. The command was given from the carrier USS Abraham Lincoln, neutralize the threat before the launchers could cycle to weapons-free. On the aft deck of the USS Mason, the armored hatches of the Mark 41 vertical launch system slid open with a sharp, pneumatic hiss. Inside the silos, 16 Tomahawk land attack missiles sat in a state of high readiness, their internal inertial navigation systems slaved to the target coordinates provided by the overhead stealth fighters. The air around the launch deck grew still for a heartbeat. The only sound the low hum of the deck, ship's cooling fans, and the distant, muffled roar of a departing jet. The trigger was squeezed. The first Tomahawk shrieked off the rail, a massive white column of fire punching backward through the smoke and washing across the faces of the sailors standing nearest the superstructure. The heat blast, reaching over 2,000 degrees, was a physical blow that compressed the air in the immediate vicinity. The missile rose vertically on a pillar of orange flame for 100 feet before its small turbofan engine ignited with a comsize, high-pitched whine. The smoke rose in a dense, roiling white column that blotted out the eastern horizon for 3 full seconds, smelling sharply of chemical propellant and scorched paint. 12 miles to the north, the hidden Iranian mobile battery, consisting of 3 heavy transport erector launchers, was in the process of raising its missile canisters. The Iranian crews worked with frantic speed, their boots crunching on the dry volcanic gravel as they struggled with the heavy hydraulic lines. The lead Tomahawk warhead, a 1,000-pound high-explosive unitary charge, punched clean through the camouflaged netting and the thin steel roof of the primary launcher vehicle. The impact was not a muffled bang, but a catastrophic detonation that shattered the vehicle's frame and ignited the solid fuel rocket motors of the 2 anti-ship missiles still in their tubes. The turret of the launcher was thrown straight off the chassis, 15 tons of steel rising 6 meters into the air before it fell back and crushed 4 men running from the initial fireball. The secondary explosion was a white flash so intense it bleached the morning sky of all color for a fraction of a second. A shockwave rippled outward, shattering the glass of a command observation post 500 yards away and knocking the Iranian defenders flat. Black smoke, thick and oily, boiled out of the crater where the launcher had stood. The heat so intense that the surrounding limestone began to crack and vitrify. The surviving Iranian battery members did not stand still. They reacted with panicked desperation, attempting to drive the remaining 2 launchers back into the deep rock tunnels of the cliffside. The heavy trucks roared, their diesel engines screaming as they kicked up clouds of white dust in a mad scramble for cover. But the 2nd and 3rd Tomahawks were already in their terminal dive, guided by the infrared heat signatures of the escaping engines. The 2nd missile drove into the rear of the middle launcher, severing the fuel lines and the hydraulic steering rack instantly. The vehicle swerved violently to the left, slamming into the rock wall of the tunnel entrance and erupting in a fountain of sparks and burning fuel. The aircraft of the carrier air wing, loitering 5 miles offshore, observed the destruction with clinical detachment. The lead pilot of an F-A-18 Super Hornet saw the 3rd launcher disappear into the smoke, its silhouette swallowed by a fireball that rose 200 feet above the ridgeline. Debris shards of tires, jagged pieces of missile canisters, and twisted engine blocks scattered across a half-mile radius before the splace's largest pieces hit the ground with heavy, metallic thuds. The radio channels of the Iranian Regional Command Center went silent for exactly 3 seconds, then erupted in overlapping, panicked voices that were quickly cut off by the persistent electronic jamming of the Growlers. Black smoke rose from the wreckage, still settling into the blackened earth of Qeshm Island. The burning pieces of the mobile battery were still glowing red when the next wave of American aircraft moved in to survey the damage. The 4-beat strike had been a great masterpiece of coordinated violence, leaving the primary Iranian missile threat a pile of smoldering, unrecognizable scrap. The immediate aftermath was a scene of absolute ruin, with the sharp chemical bite of burning propellant lingering in the air like a poisonous fog. The defensive perimeter, 10:15 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. The central corridor of the Strait of Hormuz was now a high-velocity combat zone, the air vibrating with the low-frequency thrum of high-performance engines and the sharp, electric crackle of active radar. At coordinates 26 degrees 50 minutes north, 55 degrees 55 minutes east, the carrier strike group detected a new and asymmetric threat. From the jagged, limestone coves along the Iranian coastline, dozens of small, high-speed silhouettes emerged into the open water. These were the Fast Attack, craft of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy's small, fiberglass-hulled vessels capable of speeds exceeding 50 knots, each armed with heavy machine guns and twin anti-ship missile canisters. The Iranian tactic was a classic swarm maneuver, designed to overwhelm the defensive systems of the American warships through sheer numbers and chaotic, multi-directional movement. The small boats skipped across the 2-meter swells, their wakes creating white, jagged scars on the dark blue surface of the strait. The smell of high-octane gasoline and salt spray filled the air as the lead vessels closed the distance to the outer screening of the carrier strike group. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Mason, the tactical action officer watched the digital display as 22 red icons converged on their position. Contact. Multiple small boats. Bearing 040. Range 5 miles and closing, the radar operator announced, his voice tight but controlled. The command was given to engage with all available close-in weapon systems and stabilized small-caliber mounts. On the starboard side of the USS Mason, the Mark 38 25mm chain gun roared to life. The weapon, controlled by a remote optical sensor, spat out a stream of high-explosive incendiary rounds at a rate of 200 shots per minute. The sound was a rhythmic, mechanical pounding that shook the hull of the destroyer. The rounds walked across the water in a series of white splashes before finding the lead Iranian boat. The thin fiberglass hull offered no resistance. The shells punched straight through the engine block and the fuel tank, causing the vessel to erupt in a brilliant orange fireball that sent jagged pieces of the hull flying 50 feet into the air. Simultaneously, the CIWS, or Close-In Weapon System, mounted on the aft superstructure of the USS Philippine Sea, began its automated engagement sequence. The 20mm Gatling gun, nicknamed R2D2 by the crew for its white, dome-shaped radar housing, rotated with blurring speed. When it fired, the sound was a continuous, bone-shaking buzz, like a giant industrial saw cutting through steel. A stream of tungsten armor-piercing rounds stitched a line of destruction across 3 Iranian boats simultaneously. The hulls were shredded into white dust and splinters, the engines exploding as the heavy rounds tore through the metallic components. The smell of burnt powder and hot oil was thick on the deck as the empty brass casings clattered into the collection bins. From the hangars of the surrounding destroyers, MH-60 Sierra helicopters launched into the fray, their door gunners armed with AGM-114 Hellfire missiles. The helicopters hovered at 300 feet, providing a stable platform for the laser-guided weapons. One by one, the Hellfires shrieked off the rails, their small rocket motors leaving thin trails of white smoke. Each missile impacted an Iranian boat with surgical precision, the high-explosive warheads obliterating the small targets in single, violent flashes. The Iranian crews attempted to return fire with shoulder-fired rocket-propelled grenades and heavy machine guns, the tracers creating a frantic, crisscrossing pattern of green and red light against the morning sky. But the American armor and electronic jamming rendered their efforts largely ineffective. The swarm began to break apart as the remaining boats realized the futility of the head-on assault. Several vessels attempted to bank hard to the north, their engines screaming as they sought the safety of the coastal shallows. But the American response was relentless. The F-18 Super Hornets, loitering overhead, descended to low altitude, using their internal cannons to strafe the retreating craft. The water around the boats boiled with the impact of 20mm rounds, the surface littered with burning debris and the spreading black stains of oil. The air was a cacophony of overlapping explosions and the high-pitched whine of jet engines performing low-level passes. By 10:45, the surface engagement was effectively over. Of the 22 Iranian vessels that had participated in the swarm, 14 were destroyed, and 4 were left dead in the water, thick black smoke rising from their shattered hulls. The remaining craft had fled back into the hidden coves of Qeshm Island. The USS Mason and the USS Philippine Sea remained on high alert, their gun barrels hot and their sensors searching for any sign of a follow-on attack. The immediate threat to the carrier strike group had been neutralized through a combination of superior technology and overwhelming, multi-layered firepower. The Strait of Hormuz remained a dangerous and volatile battlefield, but the American screen had held firm against the most desperate of Iranian tactics. 11:15 in the morning on the 10th of March, 2026. With the primary Iranian coastal batteries silenced and the surface swarm neutralized, a new and invisible danger remained beneath the surface of the Strait of Hormuz. At coordinates 26 degrees 52 minutes north, 56 degrees 8 minutes east. The water was a deceptive, glassy turquoise that masked a lethal field of bottom-dwelling naval mines. These influence mines, triggered by the magnetic signature or acoustic frequency of a passing warship, had been deployed by Iranian fast layers during the opening minutes of the conflict. To ensure the safe passage of global energy supplies and the remaining vessels of the amphibious group, the United States Navy initiated a specialized clearing operation. The lead vessel for this mission was the Avenger-class mine countermeasures ship USS Gladiator, designation MCM-11. Unlike the steel-hulled destroyers, the Gladiator was constructed of wood and fiberglass to minimize its magnetic footprint. The air on the small ship was heavy with the scent of salt air and the electronic hum of specialized sonar equipment. Moving at a cautious 3 knots, the crew deployed the AN/SQQ-89 sonar system, which scanned the seabed for metallic anomalies. The tension on the bridge was a physical weight, every sailor standing perfectly still to avoid creating unnecessary vibrations that might trigger a sensitive acoustic fuse. Contact, submerged object, bearing 350, range 200 yards, the sonar technician reported. The object was identified as an Iranian-made Sadaf-2 contact mine, a spiked steel sphere moored to the seabed by a heavy chain. To neutralize the threat, the USS Gladiator deployed a Seafox remotely operated vehicle. The small, yellow submersible dived into the dark water, its electric motors whirring as it was, guided toward the mine by a fiber optic cable. The camera feed in the control room showed the mine swaying gently. In the current, its rusted steel horns looking like the thorns of a giant underwater plant. The Seafox attached a small, shaped charge explosive to the mine's casing. Moments after the vehicle was retracted to a safe distance, the charge was detonated. A muffled, deep-frequency thud shook the hull of the Gladiator, followed by a massive dome of white water that rose 10 feet above the surface. The smell of dead fish and churned-up seabed silt filled the air as the pulverized remains of the mine drifted toward the bottom. This process was repeated 6 times over the next 3 hours, a slow, nerve-wracking mechanical ballet that required absolute precision. Supporting the effort from the air were 2 MH-53 Echo Sea Dragon helicopters from Mine Countermeasures Squadron 15. These massive, 3-engine aircraft hovered at 100 feet, towing specialized sleds through the water. The sleds emitted powerful magnetic and acoustic signals, designed to trick the more advanced bottom mines into detonating prematurely. Each time a mine exploded behind a sled, a massive shockwave rattled the helicopter's airframe, the pilots fighting the controls to maintain a steady hover in the humid, turbulent air. The sky was filled with the rhythmic beating of the heavy rotors and the smell of hot hydraulic fluid. On the surface, Navy explosive ordnance disposal technicians, the elite divers of the EOD teams, worked from small rubber raiding craft. They dived into the murky water to manually inspect objects that the sonar could not clearly identify. The divers moved with calm, measured breathing, their specialized non-magnetic gear allowing them to work within inches of a potential trigger. The water around them was thick with particulate matter and the iridescent sheen of spilled oil from the earlier battles. Each time a diver surfaced and gave a sharp all-clear signal, a collective breath was released across the flotilla. By 2:30 in the afternoon, a 3-mile-wide safe lane had been cleared through the heart of the strait. The USS Gladiator and its support helicopters had successfully neutralized 14 mines, ensuring that the heavy transport ships and commercial tankers could move without the risk of a hull rupturing explosion. The lane was marked by a series of glowing green GPS buoys, a digital highway through a graveyard of steel. The clearing of the mines was the final tactical hurdle. In re-establishing control over the waterway, a quiet but essential victory that allowed the full weight of the United States Navy to be projected once again into the Persian Gulf. 3:30 in the afternoon on the 10th of March, 2026. The searing heat of the Persian Gulf sun beat down on the twisted, metal and oil-slicked waters of the Strait of Hormuz. At coordinates 26 degrees 46 minutes north, 55 degrees 48 minutes east, the heavy, humid air was finally beginning to clear of the thick black smoke that had dominated the morning. The smell of the sea, salty, fishy, and ancient, was returning, though it remained tainted by the persistent, chemical stench of burnt explosive filler and the ozone of high-powered radar arrays. On the bridge of the USS San Antonio, the command team stood in a somber, focused silence as the final casualty reports and damage assessments were compiled into a single, classified digital file. The cost of the Iranian opening salvo was severe and deeply felt across the amphibious group. 2 landing craft utility, 1665 and 1666, had been completely struck from the naval vessel register. 42 United States personnel, sailors, and Marines were initially reported missing. Following the intensive 6-hour search and rescue operation, 12 survivors had been recovered. From the water, many suffering from severe flash burns, shrapnel wounds, and the toxic effects of ingesting marine fuel. 30 personnel were officially dented, confirmed killed in action, their names being prepared for the grim task of next of kin notification. The deck of the transport dock was a scene of controlled mourning, with a temporary morgue established in the refrigerated storage area and the remaining Marines standing watch over the personal effects of their fallen brothers. The physical damage to the United States fleet, however, was localized to the 2 lost craft. The destroyer USS Mason and the cruiser USS Philippine Sea reported 0 personnel casualties and only minor cosmetic damage to their topside paint from the concussive force of their own continuous gunnery. The Aegis combat system had performed with nearly 100% efficiency, intercepting every secondary threat and providing a near-perfect electronic shield for the larger carrier strike group. The technical professionalism of the crews had prevented the loss of a multi-billion-dollar capital ship, a feat of seamanship measured in seconds and inches. In contrast, the Iranian coastal defense network along the southern shoreline of Qeshm Island was a landscape of total, blackened ruin. Assessment from the E-2 Charlie Hawkeye and overhead satellite imagery confirmed the destruction of 3 primary reinforced concrete artillery bunkers. Each bunker had been hit by multiple 1,000-pound precision munitions, collapsing the internal structures and entombed the gun crews within. The mobile anti-ship missile battery, consisting of 3 transport erector launchers, had been reduced to piles of fused aluminum and melted rubber. Estimates indicated that over 180 Iranian personnel had been killed during the kinetic strikes, including the senior command staff at the local coastal observation post. The surface engagement had been equally one-sided. 14 fast attack craft of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy were confirmed sunk, their hulls resting in the shallow silt of the coastal coves. 4 more vessels were derelict and burning, their crews having abandoned ship into the shark-infested waters of the strait. The Iranian naval presence in the immediate vicinity had been effectively erased, with the surviving remnants fleeing toward the mainland under the cover of the inland mountain ranges. The electronic warfare blanket maintained by the Growlers had ensured that the Iranian leadership remained largely ignorant of the scale of their losses until the first survivors reached the shore on foot. As the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon, the strategic reality of the engagement became clear. The United States had suffered a painful, bloody nose in the opening minutes, losing 30 brave men and 2 essential transport vessels. But the response had been a display of overwhelming, systematic destruction. For every American life lost, the Iranian military had lost an entire battery, a missile platoon, or a swarm of attack craft. The cost of doing business in the strait had been set at a price the Iranian government could not sustain for more than 24 hours. The air on the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln remained thick with the smell of jet exhaust as the last of the strike fighters returned for recovery. The pilots climbed out of their cockpits, their faces pale with the exhaustion of high-G maneuvering and the adrenaline of real-world combat. There were no cheers on the deck, only the professional nodding of heads and the quick, efficient movement of the maintenance crews. The campaign report was nearly complete. A document written in fire and steel that would be analyzed by military historians for decades. The Strait of Hormuz was open, but it was now a waterway policed by the gray hulls of the 7th Fleet, their guns still warm and their resolve hardened by the blood in the water.